Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Ayubowan. On behalf of AmCham Sri Lanka, let me take this opportunity to thank you for taking the time to join us. We currently have close to 100 of you already online. So thank you. Despite the challenging times and everything that's going on, you've taken the time to join us. And let me start off, of course, by saying that on behalf of AmCham and on behalf of all of our panelists, that we hope that you and your loved ones remain safe and unaffected by this crisis that is currently upon us. Obviously, the situation that's upon us is absolutely unprecedented. The IMF on Tuesday released their World Economic Outlook for April 2020, and in it, the IMF predicts at best a 3% shrinkage of the world economy. Both the IMF managing director and its chief economist were clear that this was a best case scenario, and in fact that things could get much, much worse. Now, the fact is that normally one would say, well, there's nothing you can do about it, so let's just figure this out. Yes, we do need to figure this out, but this is one of those, or probably the rarest occasion, where before I introduce our topic and our panel this afternoon, I just want to remind each of you out there that yes, there is actually something that we can do about this, and that is very simply to stay at home. How fast we recover from this catastrophe globally is actually up to us. So let's all do our part and work together, both to navigate through this crisis as well as, in the aftermath of it. Doing our part is the only way that the economy is going to recover. If you take a look at the report from the IMF, we've actually shared that via our bulletin board this morning. You'll find that the predictions for Asia are not really too terrible when compared with the rest of the world. But then again, it is up to us on how fast we recover from this. So the topic for today's AmCham Sri Lanka Knowledge Hub series webinar is the implications of COVID-19 on the Sri Lankan economy, an in-depth discussion. Let me start by introducing our eminent panelists. We have Dr. Kumudu Gunasekera. Dr. Gunasekera is one of the managing directors of Stax Colombo, where he leads the firm's APAC expansion efforts. He's also the president emeritus of the American Chamber of Commerce, among his many other roles. Prior to joining Stax, Kumudu was a principal economist with Parsons Brinkhoff, the professional services arm of WPT. Shiluka Gunawardhan also joining us today. Shiluka is the principal for deal advisory of KPMG in Sri Lanka. He counts over 20 years of experience, and his areas of expertise include deal advisory, financial management, international markets, property development, and real estate. Shiluka is an associate member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka. Also on our panel today, Mr. Mano Sekeram, who counts over 25 years of global experience in IT software management and is an industry thought leader. He is a regular representative of Sri Lanka's IT and BPM industry nationally and globally, and he is the founder of Startup X Foundry, an organization dedicated in incubating and accelerating Sri Lankan startups. Mano is the chairman emeritus of the IT BPM sector's apex body, SLASCOM, and sits on the boards of numerous Sri Lankan universities and higher education institutes. And last but not least, your moderator for this afternoon, Deshal De Mel, is an economist who has experience across government, private sector, and academia. He served as the economic advisor to the Ministry of Finance from 2017 to 2019, working on tax reforms and other public finance matters. He previously worked in the corporate sector as a senior economist at the Haley's Group, and was on a number of corporate and non-corporate boards, including at present Sampat Bank PLC. Deshal was recognized by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader in 2019. Your host for this afternoon, myself, Rai Raymond. I'm the General Manager ED of the American Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka. And again, welcome, thank you, and handing over to you, Deshal, to take over from here.
Thank you very much, Rai, and I'd like to thank the AmCham for the opportunity to be a part of this event this afternoon. It's a privilege to moderate a very eminent panel of industry experts who will, I'm sure, bring their vast experience and expertise to share some of their thoughts in terms of how Sri Lanka navigates the crisis that we are facing right now and likely to be going through for several months to come. So if we quickly move to the topic, So the topic of the discussion today is implications of COVID-19 on the Sri Lankan economy. We want to touch on a few different areas. I'll speak briefly on some of the headline macroeconomic risks and issues that are on the horizon that we need to be cognizant of and aware of. We'll also go into I think we'll spend most of our time discussing the recommendations from a business perspective in terms of how do businesses look at coping and surviving the immediate challenging period, and then also adapting and being able to grow and to move things forward once we see an evolution from where we are today to hopefully a more stable environment going forward. It's likely to be a very different space and a very different operating environment that we all right now we have to imagine. So I think panels like today's panel will hopefully help us in terms of trying to understand what that space is like to look like, and how do we position businesses in order to be able to succeed in that kind of environment as well. We'll also want to touch on some of the areas where we are likely to see success, and businesses and sectors that are likely to do well in the emerging environment, and also, of course, to understand which areas would suffer and would find it most challenging. So our panelists will each have 5 minutes initial intervention. I will speak first, as I said, on some of my thoughts on the unraveling economic situation. Each panelist will have 5 to 6 minutes in terms of the initial presentations, and then we will take questions that the audience will be sending in. I believe there's a Q&A option through the app. So I'll be taking on those questions and sharing it with our panel, and we'll be able to hopefully respond to your questions in the best way possible. Okay, to kick things off, so in terms of how do we see the economy evolving in the next 5 to 6 months and beyond that as well. So if you look back at our starting point, so the Sri Lankan economy has entered this crisis on a relatively weak footing. We must realize that Sri Lanka has already gone through a number of crises in the last several years. So in 2017, we endured the worst drought that the country has faced in 40 years. That had significant impacts on the agricultural sector, the rural economy in general. In 2018, we had a constitutional crisis that had significant macroeconomic ramifications as well. We had a lot of capital outflows from the economy, significant impacts on liquidity, which affected overall macroeconomic management as well. And then in 2019, of course, we had the Easter Sunday attacks that had major implications for the tourism sector and the economy overall. Today's crisis is, of course, much worse than all of these probably put together. It is a globally very significant event. Every single country in the world is affected. As Raya mentioned, the statistics in terms of projections of the IMF's expectations of global economic contraction of 3%. Advanced economies are contracting at a probably higher level than that. IMF's projection for Sri Lanka is a minus 0.5% contraction. The World Bank is predicting a 3% contraction in 2020 for Sri Lanka. So all of what we can see is that, look, we are coming into a crisis on an already weak setting, and in that weak setting, the precedent crises have resulted in affecting Sri Lanka's growth. In 2019, our growth rate was just 2.3%. Consumption has also been weak in those precedent 3 years. Credit quality at banks has deteriorated. Non-performing loans have doubled in the last 18 months or so. And also government finances have also been adversely affected in leading up to this crisis. So all of these has put us in a not in the ideal way to face up to the challenges that our economy is going to face. Now, given our relatively weak government fiscal position also, we don't have the ammunition that some of the other countries have in terms of deploying, say, fiscal stimulus measures, monetary stimulus measures, to be able to combat the large shrinkage that we are going to see in aggregate demand, and also the supply constraints that we're seeing in the global economy as well. So we lack the firepower to be able to, say, address to countervail a 3% shrinkage in GDP. We don't have the the fiscal ammunition to be able to countervail that with the large-scale boost in spending and so on. So that's an immediate initial challenge that we face, and as a result of that, the government has been using more unorthodox methods to address the immediate challenges, and they've really not been left with too much choice in this matter. So the government has been doing a very accommodative monetary policy, including direct purchase by the central bank of treasury bonds, which is effectively printing of money to finance government activity. There's also been very aggressive loosening of monetary policy, and a lot of the support for the private sector is expected to be driven through the banking system, which again has come with its own challenges. Given the fact that the banks alone cannot bear all the risk in terms of supporting the corporate and the private sector in this situation. So in the short term, it is possible to accommodate this kind of extraordinary monetary measures that are being taken. Even in terms of printing money, you're not going to see an immediate inflationary impact or a major balance of payments impact in the short term, because you're already seeing contracted aggregate demand in the economy. The tricky thing comes in the medium term in terms of how you move out of this and prevent this from hurting sentiment and expectations. And already we have seen some adverse sentiment implications in terms of what's been happening on the currency side, and so on, probably affected by the response to in terms of the monetary measures as well. But basically, in the next 6 months, from a policy perspective, the government has a very difficult balance to address. It has to make sure that there is enough liquidity in the system to ensure the continuation of economic activity, to ensure that people are able to support livelihoods. But at the same time, you have to be conscious and cognizant of the fact that you cannot allow this to affect confidence in the market and sentiment in the medium term as well. So this is it's a very difficult balance to meet, and hopefully the right kind of balance can be struck going forward. The other big challenge that we have in the next 3 to 6 months is our external payments. So we have external liabilities maturing in 2020 of around $6 billion US. As at the end of March, we had about $7.4 billion US worth of reserves. So clearly, there is a very limited space in terms of reserves that we have to balance these to meet the liabilities that are coming up. And therefore, I think it's important that Sri Lanka pushes to try to get some kind of moratorium on at least our bilateral and multilateral obligations that are maturing in the next few months, and also to try to seek some kind of line of support from one of the key international financial institutions. There's a news report today that the government has approached the IMF for a rapid credit facility. I think that's it's a good step forward in terms of trying to anchor some kind of stability and confidence back in the market, particularly considering the upcoming liabilities that we need to be able to meet up to. So clearly, there is a lot of challenges on the macroeconomic front. We're going to see growth. I think the consensus is now coming towards a contraction of the Sri Lankan economy in 2020. Jobs are obviously going to get affected as well. We've heard of a number of companies already outlining plans of reduction in remuneration in the short term, and all of these measures have to be taken to ensure the survival of the economy as well. What we have to keep sight of the fact that we have a large informal economy as well. We have a large number of people who earn wages who are reliant on daily wages, and it is essential that the government is able to provide support for this vulnerable segment of the economy as well. So it's a lot of challenges on the economic front. But I think now let's try to take into a more micro level view and start to look at some of the company level responses that we can take. I'd like to invite Dr. Kumudu Gunasekera to share his remarks now. Thanks.
Sure, thanks, Deshal. Rai, will you be able to put up the slides? Hey, Rai? Perfect, thanks, thank you. Yeah, so I think Deshal gave a good overview of the very difficult task ahead for Sri Lanka in terms of the economic recovery. What I'm focusing more on is what we are doing with a lot of corporates, both locally and globally, in terms of how to help them navigate through these crises and some of the steps that they are taking. It's really, the corporate sector has a big part to play in accelerating our rebound from the impending recession. And, in these type of global events, when there's a global downturn of this magnitude, often what you see is there are corporates that really thrive in the uptake and become billion-dollar companies. If you take the example of Alibaba after SARS, really Alibaba's growth trajectory increased after SARS because of the consumption patterns changed as a result of SARS. Or if you take Ryanair, which is one of the most successful budget airlines, what the founder of Ryanair did was, after 9/11, there were a lot of planes that were out there to be bought for at a very discounted rate, and he went and started spending and buying all this inventory of planes, and then created Ryanair, and rest is history. So billion-dollar companies that are going to be formed as a result of this downturn, and what we as Sri Lankans should aspire to be is to become one or two of those $1 billion companies. So what can we do to do that? For us, from my view, I feel that the global economy is still very much dependent on the US economy. And really understanding what the US economy does will have a significant role for us in our recovery. Even today, the largest single export market for Sri Lanka is the US. It accounts for about 25% of our total manufacturing export bill. So if you look at, if you go to the next slide, Rai, there are different scenarios that can be mapped in terms of the GDP recovery, the global recovery and the US recovery. Initially, when this pandemic happened, most economists were saying, hey, it could be a V-shaped recovery, which is A4 in this chart. But increasingly, once we started understanding the nature of COVID-19, it is increasingly likely that the recovery is going to either be A3 or A1. And based on today's information, what most economists are predicting is an A1 type recovery for the US market. A1 is really what is now coined the hammer and dance recovery, where you have a forced lockdown where pretty much the entire economy comes to a standstill, and then slowly start opening up the economy. But there will be a dance scenario where there'll be instances, pockets of this virus coming up, and then forced lockdowns in certain pockets of certain regions. So it's going to be a ebb and flow type recovery. Now, what does this mean for the US economy? Now, if you go to the next slide, then the next slide, right? Yeah, so if you go to the next slide, this slide really talks about the US economic impact and charted with two scenarios. The A3 scenario, which is kind of a stable U-shaped recovery, or the A1 scenario where there is kind of the hammer and dance scenario. And if you see, most likely what folks are predicting is the A1, that is a 13% decline from the peak And that rivals the 1950s post-World War II downturn. So this is serious. There's a serious economic impact in the US and as a result to the global economy. And if you look at the 1930s was the Great Depression, and 1918, around 1918 was the Spanish flu. So just so that in comparison, what the downturn would look like. The next slide. So what we know is there was certain, so that we talked about there's going to be a structural shift in how we operate as individuals, governments, and businesses. And how can local businesses, how Sri Lankan businesses, how can we take advantage of this? There were 4 real trends that were happening way before COVID. These were trends that were happening globally, and we were kind of getting accustomed to these trends. What COVID has done is these trends have been accelerated at a rapid pace, and post-COVID, it's going to become mainstream. It's going to become part and parcel of our new normal. So these 4 trends that we're seeing is, one is virtualization of events, activities, and interactions. What we're doing right now today, right? That's going to become commonplace. Automation of processes and services. The focus on customer intimacy and centricity. Before, if you look at any corporation, the focus was on supply chain. And I'm not saying supply chain is still important, but increasingly, customer intimacy and customer centricity is going to become more important than focusing on the supply chain. But supply chain becomes more and more given. And the fourth element is the political and economic decentralization. Now, sitting here today, we'll be like, okay, what are you talking about? It's actually going towards becoming more more centralized as opposed to decentralized. But if you look at what's happening globally, if you take the US, for example, funding to organizations such as the WHO and others are going to shrink over time, which is already happening. You can see the tussle between the federal government in the US and individual states. So these are, for example, New York State Governor Cuomo and President Trump. There is contentious contention between the 2 parties. So that type of decentralization is going to become mainstream going forward, especially with the other 3 trends coming up. So because when you have cashless societies, when you have virtualization of events, decentralization becomes possible. If you go to the next slide, it really talks about some of the innovations that are already underway. These are some that we found in different countries, from robotics being used for carrying food to disinfecting to even doing tours of real estate, showing houses by using robotic measures. Autonomous vehicles are now actually being used to deliver food in quarantined areas. Drones are used to walk dogs in this crisis, to check temperatures of large gatherings and identify folks who have high temperatures. And then startup, and Mano will talk about all the startup sphere is going to kind of really bubble with this, because there's going to be so many opportunities for new startups to take advantage. And some I've already started with smart bands that alert you not to touch your face, and others coming up. If you go to the next slide, this shows you some of the industries that we are working with and that we are seeing, that is having categorized into 6 areas: short-term boost, long-term stability, short-term boost long-term growth, etc. And what we've listed out here is some of the emerging industries, especially from a short-term boost perspective, from teleconference, telehealth, online pharmacies, as well as some areas that would really take a hit. For example, traditional retailers may never come back to where it was. And then you have places like tourism, commercial construction, restaurants, which will take a short-term hit, but will take a long-time recovery, will be in the long-term recovery arc. If you go to the next slide, the next slide talks about what we see, what our clients are asking from us, and what we feel is really important at this time to really become and take advantage of the uptake. We bucketed it into three areas. One is enhancing resilience across people, process, and technology, so improving remote connectivity, merging different systems. If you go to most companies, there are disparate server-based technology systems out there. How do you bring it into one system to make it cloud-based, etc.? That's kind of one bucket. The other bucket is really ensuring cash flow and stability for the long haul. So really focusing on making sure that you have enough cash flow and you manage your cash flow that you can survive for the 6 to 12 month period. That's critical, because it's no point having all these ideas and burning your cash in the first 3 months of this pandemic and then not having cash to survive and be relevant during the uptake. So that's very important to kind of really focus on that area. The third bucket is really the 6-month priority plan. Really focusing today on what are our strategic initiatives that we need to prioritize, what are new initiatives that are needed to become successful in the new normal and become potentially $1 billion company. We need to aspire, our companies, especially our larger companies, should aspire to become one of the giants globally, because this allows us to really take advantage of trends that are happening. Finally, I know my 5 minutes is up, so the final slide really talks about, I'm going to leave you with a quote, which is kind of: a successful company needs to maintain a heightened sense of crisis. And that's critical, I think. When we come out of this, we need to always operate as a company in this kind of mode, because this will bring us the best out of us, of our corporate leaders, and all of us to really aspire and become successful. Yeah. That's it, Deshal.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Kumudu. I'd just like to remind the audience that you can send in any questions that you may have through the Q&A panel. Shiluka, are you back on the call? Shiluka, are you back on the call? No. Mano, can I go to you? I think Shiluka just dropped off for a tick. If you could share your comments now, Mr. Mano Sekeram.
Can you see me? Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Deshal, and thanks, AmCham. So what I'm going to do is just to give you, like Deshal and Kumudu, just give you overview from my reflection. So the most important thing for me is just to reflect on the lessons what we have learned about this pandemic. So for me, today there is nothing called no global disaster, right? This has never happened in our lifetimes, to have a disaster which has stretched from one ocean to another ocean. And Corona has a global reach. It will affect everyone. It has affected everyone. And what we realize is world is not competent to prevent such a global epidemic, right? And then all the research, what has happened in medical, they've been unable to prevent this, or at least had warning systems for this. And in my opinion, that the vaccine is about 12 to 18 months. The world will become normal. I think it'll take us almost 24 months to get the whole world vaccinated. So we're going to live through a new post-COVID world. The reflections on business, I think this question of world is flat, globalization is no more valid. Trying to source from global centers at the lowest cost or at the location is no more true, right? We've seen what has happened to supply chains, and it is not about being global. It's the lessons what we are learning is about being local. Technology is going to play a major role in connecting business, the people, the way we will consume our services. And everyone has to adopt technology. Cash will be king, and business models will move to become more variable business model. And you have to be very flexible in the way you manage cash. Viability of business models are most important, and for these valuation on future earnings, all I believe is out of the door. Personally, I think there's a lot of changes will happen in our personal lives, the way we consume, and I think that is very important to understand consumerization, how we will consume, where we will live in the next 24 months. You will live close to your workplace or outside your workplace. Hygienic standards will become very important. They'll be very hygienic focused. We will try to do it yourself. We won't have domestic, at least in Sri Lanka, in terms of driving and etc. There will be a birth of a shared economy. And there'll be a lot of focus on wellness, traceability, and community bondings will be strengthened. So I think in a certain way, we will relive some of the lives what we have been used during our childhood. The post-COVID world will be driven by technology, right? This is unprecedented times. We will see highly automated production facilities and infrastructure, right? Less of human contacts, right? People, I think Kumudu has touched upon drones, automated vehicles, and etc. Work from home will be the norm going forward for industries, which even government. And we'll be able to control machines and robots sitting at home. So I think this remote controlling of technology will also be beginning. Digital transformation, digital economy will play a massive role. That's right. An emergence of video conferencing, quality of video conferencing will go. And there'll be an increased confidence in technology. And of course, you will have all these issues around technology. And you will see everybody today, where you come from does not matter what age group, the use of technology will happen. Well-being, I think every government will invest a lot on health. There'll be a massive social change. The way we will look at post-COVID world, we'll have a lot of empathy, a lot of philanthropy, because we have to live as a community together. There'll be a lot of positive things in about our environment, and the education system, how we teach ourselves, the kids in the university will reform tremendously. And then staying at home will become a positive experience. It depends, right? And then we have to start working towards this. So I just want to focus on how countries will react, and that is very important for us to understand as businesses, as startups, what each of our domestic countries and world countries. I think most countries will go into a closed economy. There'll be a massive shift to do localization, right? They want to be self-reliant and self-sufficient, especially in food, right? Food security will become number one. No country will depend upon importing food for them to survive. So food security, the use of fertilizer, anything to do with agro-dependent will reduce. That's right. Health will be a key priority. We will want to manufacture some of the drugs locally. And countries will try to de-risk supply chain, and supply chain resilient will be key, and look for alternative sources, most probably locally. The trading economy will ease to be everything to be produced. We will see changes in labor laws and use of technology. And citizen tracking and tracing will happen. We will have some conflicts between individual privacy will take a dent. See individual privacy against community well-being, and this will happen. And for businesses, cash will definitely king, I think, someone. And digital transformation. Today, no business will survive without being digital and to provide online services. At the end of this whole COVID, post-COVID disruption, whether business big or small, they will think like startup. They will become startups because you have to be agile. You have to rethink your entire business model. You have to be nimble, and you have to innovate yourself. So this is not going to be, in my opinion, there's not going to be difference between big corporates, small ones, or startups. Everyone will have to have that startup mentality. It is a different world. We have to fight for a smaller pie. The economies will shrink, and you have to reinvent yourself. There'll be a lot of opportunities in local supply chains and sourcing. We have to redesign our supply, as I said about, and we have to build agility. And we have to look for opportunities among this adversity. There'll be a completely new consumption pattern. And I think if you really look, the opportunities, I just want to finish off touching about the opportunities. The opportunities will be in shared economy, online learning, digital services, in financial. We will have a lot of new banks coming. We don't need these brick and mortar banks. We'll have a lot of reforms in financial transactions and etc. You'll have a lot of neobanks, peer-to-peer lendings, personal healthcare, medical services and supply. Agriculture will take center stage. Technology use in agriculture, in delivering, in food processing will happen. So there are going to be a lot of opportunities. And these opportunities didn't exist. So there's a lot of opportunities for startups to focus on it, and especially rural SMEs to look into these opportunities and make a new business to happen. So that's basically my short pitch on my reflections and what would be a post-COVID world. Thank you.
Mano, thanks a lot. That was fantastic. So unfortunately, Shiluka has dropped off the call. I think he's having some problems connecting. So if he comes back, we'll tag him in. But let's move into a few questions straight away. Kumudu, I'd like to go to you first. You use in your slides, you had made some references to some of the service sectors in terms of the ways that some of the sectors like health and education would get affected, and then the recovery patterns. I wanted to touch a little bit on manufacturing as well. Now, one of the potential opportunities is that a lot of companies will be looking at restructuring their or realigning their supply chains, wanting to have less excessive exposure in one particular country or region, and try to diversify that. And Sri Lanka, a lot of people see this as an opportunity for Sri Lanka. Could you comment on how you think Sri Lankan firms can look at positioning themselves to take advantage of a global realignment of supply chains, if that's realistic?
Absolutely, and Deshal, I think you hit exactly the right point. It's this trend of there were two trends happening even before COVID. One was the idea of nearshoring, which was apparent in the apparel sector. It was happening, so that was prevalent. The other thing that was happening was 3D printing. Technology was in its infancy, but now that technology and that ability to do 3D printing will really transform the way manufacturing happens in a certain area. The third trend that was happening was actually due to the trade war between China and the US before COVID. And as a result, actually we've had about 4 to 5 clients of our own who are US-based, US companies, looking to find manufacturing, to move manufacturing out of China. So that trend was already happening, and but with COVID, what would happen is these three trends will get accelerated, and absolutely there is a big opportunity for us to capture some of these companies that are looking to diversify their risk in the supply chain by moving out of China. So that's definitely yeah.
Super. There's a question for Mano. Let me read this out. Mano, you referred to food security, and Sri Lanka does rely on importing most products. What measures can we, that is the government and the private sector, take to ensure that the reduction of imports does not affect society? Does the government have the capability to minimize the impact, or will the private sector have to step in? That's from Harinta Tilakaratna. Mano, would you like to have a crack at that?
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk I won't talk for government, but I think we should not repeat these mistakes which has happened in the past. Have import without building local capacity. Right? That is vital. Just let's take one example. Let's look at cooking oil, right? We import palm oil. I think what we should do is to increase the tariff on palm oil and build local industries, right? This is very, very important for us to be self-sufficient in terms of food and agriculture. I think you need to encourage private sector. It has to be private sector led, but based on economic policies which are both in private sector and public sector in agreement. Food security is number one, because you also have to think, but there's going to be massive loss of jobs from the apparel sector, from the tourism sector, and also from our foreign workers. We need to generate employment, and then one way would be to have self-reliance in all ways. Take even detergents. We need to have more soap factories, maybe cottage industry. So I think that would be the approach. I hope I answered that question.
Super. Yeah, I have a follow-up.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, Kumudu, go for it.
Yeah, no. So I think just to add to what Mano said, I think it's when we are talking about food security and really focusing on the agriculture sector, it's critical, and Mano mentioned this, is that we don't do agriculture as we've done it before. Agriculture needs to get completely transformed to become a technology-based agriculture.
AgTech, agriculture technology, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, otherwise, and Israel is a great example of some cutting-edge technologies in agriculture that is coming out. So we need to borrow and we need to start innovating and think of agriculture as a technology business as well, rather than subsistence farming, which is what we are doing right now.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's critical. Mano, in your presentation, you talked a little bit about the banking sector and the evolution of that. Now, I think one of the results of what we saw in East Asia after SARS was this real takeoff of digital payments and FinTech. Do you think we could see that happening in Sri Lanka as well as a result of what's going on today? And if so, what can be done to catalyze this process and to accelerate it in terms of any kind of regulatory impediments or anything else that needs to be done to really take this off?
I think, Deshan, good question. I mean, you saw, I think Kumudu said during the SARS outbreak, Alibaba was built during that period, right? And I think this is, again, a good opportunity for e-commerce, delivery, any online delivery services to boom. I think already you can see most of our e-commerce companies, from Takas to right down to Saraketa, etc., whoever who is delivering e-commerce services are booming. Right? The issue is they're overwhelmed, and then in order to have the logistics to support this. So I think this is so fantastic, because you have to reimagine, or you have to imagine this post-COVID world. That's right. Everyone want to be delivered. I don't think we will go into supermarkets and start buying. Maybe we will, but it will reduce. Every aspect of what essentials, what you want for your day-to-day needs will be delivered, right? So, and I think online systems, online payment gateways in terms of e-commerce will have a massive boom. And this is where the opportunities are for the young startup companies, the entrepreneurs to take this, because I think the playing field is equal for everyone. These are new opportunities. You have to be nimble, you have to be very innovative, and to latch on to these opportunities.
Yeah, I had another question for you, Mano. So we have seen a lot of the export sectors taking quite an adverse hit during this crisis, from apparel to many of Sri Lanka's regular export sectors. What is the current situation with regard to the IT and the ITES sector? Has demand been able to hold up, or have you seen, in terms of particularly from the software side, have you seen orders coming down? What's the status from the export side for IT sector?
I think this is a good question, and then there was someone had commented to say IT sector, the guys are doing well with the dollar going up and everything, etc. It's actually you have to look at the IT sector in a different lens. First of all, you need to see who are you serving, right? Even in a global context. If you're serving the airline industry, if you're serving the entertainment industry, right, and you have a software company or an ITS operation serving these sectors which are badly affected, it's a domino effect. It's going to affect you. Right. So I think that is fundamentally we need to understand what is your market segments, right? We have companies who are actively, who have been in the past actively working in the entertainment business, in the tourism industry. They are all getting affected, right? Because it is but if you're serving in the healthcare industries, right, then it's a different story. There's a massive resurgence of what's happening. So I think the IT sector is mixed. You will have, in my opinion, 50% of our IT companies will have unprecedented effect on their revenues, right? And they will struggle. 50% will manage and pick up on this. These are established traditional companies. I mean, look at, and I will also suspect, because I mean, you take Kumudu spoke of US, and I can have some insight into Australia. Already, Australian banks want to insource some of those activities which they have already outsourced to Philippines and to China. It's purely because there is going to be a massive unemployment, right? So I think you have mixed bags, right? In terms of document processing, in terms of trying to be nimble and try to be close to customers, and you can work from home today. That is the greatest opportunity, right? You don't need to have all these big offices. You can work from home and deliver the same services. So I think IT industry is also going to face a lot of disruption. To answer to you, in the short term we are seeing, but I think in the long term we're going to be affected if we don't change our market focuses in the domains that we operate.
Super. There was another question about education. So that's another sector, of course, that gets disrupted in the current environment. Kumudu, you might want to come in on this. Do we see a kind of new paradigm in terms of the delivery of education as well? And what will there be a bigger role for the private sector to play in this new environment for education services delivery?
I think in a Sri Lankan context, I mean, I'll give you an example of what's happening in Australia, because some of our clients are actually facing this. Australia, as you know, is a big, the education system is run, the profits for the Australian education system is driven mostly from international students. So the biggest trend what they're seeing now is really moving to online e-learning, moving to opening up satellite facilities so that they can not travel to Australia to learn. So those trends are definitely happening. And I must say, in Sri Lanka, I think we are ahead of the. I don't know if we are ahead of the curve. We are moving in that curve as well, with most companies now at the corporate level encouraging their employees to take online courses. This COVID also has really enabled even schools to move towards online platforms. And I was surprised. My son is at Royal, and he's doing his exam right now online. So that kind of unthinkable change is happening, and I think these changes will stay for good. In terms of to answer your question on the private sector playing a role, absolutely. I think private sector there is a national issue around privatization of some of the education elements. That's I guess a completely different political topic, but the technology will be there.
Thanks, Kumudu. So I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions at most. So I think a couple of people have commented about trying to balance the issue of striving for self-sufficiency in agriculture and other areas, trying to balance that imperative with the interest of the consumer and with competitiveness. To ensure that we remain competitive and to avoid things like price controls, and the bad experiences of the past. Would anybody like to comment on how we could look at trying to achieve that balance?
I think what we have to understand is you have to take it in a context, right? Yes, the top 25% of the people will want free flow of things coming from overseas, but you have to take the reality here, right? Our balance of payments is going to take a massive hit, right? We import $2 billion worth of food and agriculture products into this country, 2 billion worth of vehicles coming into this country. So I think you have to take it into that context. What is important now, right, is to have that balance, right? And every country, Vietnam has already stopped export of rice, because they want to be self-sufficient. This is different times, right? And yes, there are some necessary evil has to be done for greater good, and that's my belief, right? We have to look at community as a large and bring these policies, but it has to be private sector driven. It has to be, like Kumudu said, it has to be technology. It must be based on productivity, and we will create internal competition. I don't think I will support anything which will be government owned and driven. It has to be private sector, and especially SMEs. It's no point going and putting a soap factory or detergent factory with employing thousands and thousands. It has to be broken down to village areas, and to have village entrepreneurs running this and then connect. That's my belief. It is a balance, but the basic things which we can produce, we have to be produced here.
Thanks, Manu. Just one final question that we'll take. So there's also a comment that, look, a lot of the solutions and the way forward that we've been talking about requires digital transformation, access to technology, digital money, cash payments, and so on. But Sri Lanka, the question says that is still a very cash-based society. It's a lot of what we've been talking about is would be transformative in a urban dominated economy, but given our rural centric still a significant rural economy, to what extent can this kind of transformation be realistic, particularly in the short term?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in on this, and Mano can will also have thoughts, I'm sure. Is basically, I don't think 10 years ago you would see the widespread use of smartphones, and the same question would have been said about how can smartphones and people being able to navigate a smartphone is not something that the rural folk can do. But now if you look at a pick-me driver or what have you, they have about 3 or 4 phones, and they are more adept than any urban dweller. So I think the infrastructure is there. Sri Lanka's actually, because of Axiata Group really testing out Sri Lanka as a good test bed. Our networks and our connectivity is far superior to most other countries. So we do have the infrastructure in place for Sri Lanka to really make use of this. So, I mean, there's always going to be obstacles. I think my solution is any obstacle can be overcome if you are positive and if you can really push ahead. I mean, good example is LOLC, what they have done in a global sense. Who would think that a Sri Lankan company can really dominate markets abroad? And they are doing that in certain sectors. So,
I think necessity is mother of adaptability and invention.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to change a lot of things, especially from the government's perspective in terms of liberalizing payment gateways and etc. And this push will come. We'll look at new banks and new ways of doing things, right? And I think this is the best time. Digital transformation is key for post-COVID economy, right? And I think I'm sure government will realize this. Because this is what the public will want, contactless transactions, right? And this will happen, and there is no two words. We cannot survive without this. Adaptability, I think you'll be surprised. The village folk and the rural areas will adapt, and this is a young population, and also the elders will happen. If you're at home, right, you need to order everything. Your prescription has to be ordered. Come on, this will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to wind up. Necessity is the mother of invention. Sri Lankans are very resilient folk. We've gone through a hell of a lot, and I'm sure we will come out of this using our inventiveness that has held us in good stead for millennia. So let me thank both panelists. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka was unable to connect with us, but I'm sure he will be able to share his thoughts with us at a later forum. I'm sorry that I couldn't tackle all of the questions that participants had sent in through the Q&A, but the AmCham team assures me that they will ensure that there are emailed answers provided to all the balanced questions that we couldn't touch on during our hour. So once again, thanks to both Mano and Kumudu, and thank you to the audience and to the organizers for putting together this forum and this opportunity to speak to you. Rai, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Deshal.
Thanks, Deshal. And of course, thanks again, Kumudu and Mano, for your time and for the insights and expertise shared here. As Deshal said, unfortunately, Shiluka had to drop off the call. We'll try to get him involved with the next session that we have going. Like Deshal mentioned, we do have a few questions that we were unable to give you the answers to based on our time limitations, but we will work with the panelists and get those answers across to you via email. I want to again say thank you, and both to the panelists as well as to all our attendees, and for the time taken. We hope that this has given you some sort of insight and knowledge in coping with and navigating through and in the aftermath of COVID-19. Join us again next week. We have a session planned, a webinar planned on the 23rd, which will be in relation to the labor conundrum that is currently upon us in the light of COVID-19. As you all know, there's a lot of issues there that need to be discussed, and that's what we'll be discussing next week. We will share, of course, the link to join in. My apologies to those who are unable to join today because we did reach capacity. We will work on that so that by the next webinar, we have you all joining in. Thank you to all attendees, both on the webinar here on Zoom, as well as on our Facebook Live